Welcome. I'm Dr. Owen Anderson, and I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University, and we're continuing in the study of my book, The Natural Moral Law, The Good After Modernity, and we're in chapter 2 right now. We're going to look at Aristotle today, and especially Aristotle and his views about what is eternal. This is not the same as God, and that's going to be one of the points here, is that the criticism this chapter started looking at is that natural law can be and has been used to justify competing positions. And we're going to see one of the reasons for that is that natural law has different beginnings, quote unquote natural law, right? So Aristotle's understanding of what is eternal is very different from the Christian understanding of what is eternal. And so we're going to, in this chapter, trace the influence of Aristotle on Aquinas. Now, Aristotle begins this way. He begins with the idea of what is good. He says, "Now we call that which is in itself worthy of pursuit more final than that which is worthy of pursuit for the sake of something else. And that which is never desirable for the sake of something else is more final than the things that are desirable both in themselves and for the sake of that other thing." And so he's defining the good. The good is that which is sought for its own sake. You don't want it to get to something else. You want it simply for what it is. Everything else is a means to the highest goal or good. And then he says, the goal of metaphysics is to come to know what is eternal. Eternal meaning without beginning, as opposed to what is simply transitory or potential. So there's a connection between the good and what is eternal, and the studies of ethics and metaphysics. Ethics studies what is the good, and metaphysics studies what is real. That's its highest goal. And as humans, we want to know, we want to understand. That's what it is to have human nature. And so that's what he goes on to talk about as what is a well-trained or well-educated human. Aristotle believed the purpose of the law and the state is to make men good. The man who is good must be well-trained and habituated, and go on to spend his time in worthy occupations, and neither willingly nor unwillingly do bad actions. And if this can be brought about if men live, if this can be brought about if men live in accordance with a sort of reason and right order, provided this has force. If this be so, the paternal command indeed has not the required force or compulsive power, but the law has compulsive power. So we might refresh yourself, remember back some of the different definitions we gave of law, and here we're connecting up. The law does have to have the power to enforce itself. If there's no power in law, no consequences, then the law is not actually a law. And so how do we become well-trained? Well, we have to know what is human nature. And he goes on to talk about that, the actuality of human nature, that towards which we are trying to become, and it would be expressed in human excellence. So he gives examples like an excellent flute player or sculptor or artist in general, and how they become excellent. And this illustrates Aristotle's approach to ethics. And it's based on a view of human nature and the general truth that human nature is what it is and is what is peculiar to humans. Human nature is what distinguishes us from non-humans. So the life according to reason, he says, is the happiest life because it is the life of a human. And he does say a couple different things. Sometimes it's hard to get him consistent on this point. The good sometimes is viewed as happiness. Everyone wants to be happy. However, happiness is not an end in itself. It's an effect of possessing that end. So then the end in itself is defined as the use of reason in contemplation of what's eternal. And so and that's the happiest life. That's the effect of, the happiness is the effect of that. And that sounds pretty good maybe, right? The use of reason to contemplate what is eternal, and God's eternal, so it's the use of reason to contemplate God until we start to look at what Aristotle means by God. Aristotle is what I define this chapter as a dependent dualist. What dependent dualism means is a form of Greek dualism, which says that matter has potential but not actuality apart from God. And that all things, this is why God is called the unmoved mover. Sometimes this is viewed as if God is the one who knocks over the first domino, but he himself is not knocked over. He's always been there. He knocks over the first domino, and that creates a causal chain leading to the present. But that's not how it's understood in Aristotle. Unmoved mover means God is already pure actuality, and all things are striving to become like God. So they're being moved in the sense of being drawn to be actual from being only potential, whereas God is pure actuality. And God, in pure actuality, is not aware of or interested in other things. God is involved in eternal self-contemplation. Question of if he's even aware of anything else. And so humans imitate God, become like God by also contemplating God. But that's very different than the theistic view. So in this view, God's in eternal self-contemplation, and God is the unmoved mover in the sense of all things trying to become like God, not in the sense of having created the world ex nihilo, as in theism. So this view of what is eternal is very different from theism, and the law based on this view is going to end up being very different than any law based on theism, God the Creator. And that's part of the point of this chapter, is to show how Aristotle and dependent dualism is very different from what we then end up finding in Christianity later. And so here's part of the problem for dependent dualism, which we'll look at. If matter has some existence apart from God, then this is just the same thing that Plato said. Matter has existed from eternity, and it's the same thing the materialists say, and it has the same problems, which is that matter is not self-maintaining. On the other hand, if it has no actuality apart from God, then this is just theism. God gave it actuality, gave it existence. And so in Aristotle, we'll have to see which of these two sides of that dilemma does the Aristotelian go down for dependent dualism. But either way, the unmoved mover is not the same as God the Creator. And so the natural law, or any law that we find in Aristotle, will be very different from what we would expect to find in a view that affirms God as a creator, and God creates in order to reveal his glory, as opposed to God as an eternal self-contemplation, is not aware of anything else. So thanks for joining me as we're continuing through chapter 2 of the natural moral law, looking at Aristotle and his view of the good and his view of what is eternal. See you next time.